My daughter-in-law left her laptop open on my kitchen table. I was pouring myself a second cup of coffee, the way I do every morning since my wife Margaret passed slowly. No rush, because there's no one left to rush for. The screen lit up with a notification. I wasn't trying to look. I really wasn't. But the name that appeared in that little banner at the top of the screen stopped me cold. The name was Margaret, not a name that sounds like Margaret. Not a coincidence. Margaret Ellen Howell. My wife's full name, dead 14 months. I set the coffee pot down before I dropped it. My daughter-in-law, Serena, had gotten up early to take my grandson to school. She'd left in a hurry, left her coffee half drunk, left her jacket on the back of the chair, and left her laptop open. She'd be back in 12 minutes. I knew her route. I'd driven it myself 100 times when my son Derek was still living here. I stood in my own kitchen and stared at a dead woman's name on my daughter-in-law's screen. The notification was from an email client. The subject line read, Thursday. Same place. The sender name displayed was Margaret Ellen Howell. My hands were shaking. I want to be honest about that. I'm 63 years old. I coached high school football for 22 years. I have steadied myself through 2 knee surgeries and 1 heart scare, and the worst morning of my life when the hospital called to tell me Margaret hadn't made it through the night. But standing in that kitchen, looking at my dead wife's name on my daughter-in-law's laptop, my hands shook like I was cold to the bone. I didn't touch anything. I just read what I could see. The preview showed 3 words below the subject line before it cut off. Don't forget the... That was all. 12 words total, including the subject line, and they were enough to make me feel like the floor had shifted under my feet. I heard the car pull back into the driveway. I picked up my coffee cup and walked to the window and stared out at the backyard like I'd been standing there the whole time. Margaret's rose bushes were still out there. I'd kept watering them. I don't even like roses particularly, but she'd loved them, so I kept them alive. I was looking at those roses when Serena came back inside. She said, "Good morning." I said good morning back. She picked up her laptop, closed it, tucked it under her arm, and went upstairs to the guest room she and my grandson Tyler had been staying in since Derek died. My son Derek died 8 months ago. I need to back up and explain some things, because none of this makes sense without understanding what the last 2 years of my life have looked like. Margaret was diagnosed with a heart condition in the spring 3 years back. The doctors were clear with us manageable, they said, with medication and monitoring and a few lifestyle changes. She was not supposed to die from it. That's what I kept coming back to in the months after. She was not supposed to die. She was 61 years old. She was teaching a watercolor class at the community center on Tuesday afternoons. She had a trip to see her sister in Savannah planned for October. She was not supposed to die, but she did. 14 months before the morning I'm telling you about, Margaret went to sleep in our bed and did not wake up. The autopsy said cardiac event. The doctor said sometimes it happens, even when you're managing everything correctly, even when you're doing everything right. I buried my wife, and I sat in this house alone, and I tried to understand a world that didn't have her in it. Derek took it hard. He'd always been closer to his mother than most sons I've known. He was 41, lived about 20 minutes away with Serena and Tyler, had a good job in insurance, seemed like he had a solid life. But after Margaret died, something changed in him. He got quieter. He started coming around less. Serena told me he was struggling, that grief hits people differently, that I should give him time. I gave him time. 8 months after Margaret died, Derek had a car accident on Route 9 coming home from a work dinner. Single car accident. He went off the road. The police said he may have fallen asleep at the wheel. He was gone before the ambulance arrived. I lost my wife and my only son in the span of 8 months. Serena had nowhere to go. She'd grown up in foster care, no family to speak of. So I told her she and Tyler could stay here as long as they needed. She'd been here 6 months by the morning I found that email notification on her laptop. 6 months of sharing meals and driving Tyler to school and trying, all 3 of us, to figure out how to keep living. I thought I knew this woman. I thought she was my daughter-in-law, my grandson's mother, the person I was sharing my grief with. I did not know her at all. After she went upstairs that morning, I sat down at the kitchen table and I tried to talk myself out of what I was thinking. Margaret had a common enough first name, I told myself, but not a common enough full name. Margaret Ellen Howell. How many of those are there? And why would that name be in Serena's email at all? Margaret had never been close with Serena. They'd gotten along fine, family dinners, holidays, the usual, but they weren't friends. They didn't email each other. I thought about it all day. I thought about it while I raked the leaves in the backyard, while I made lunch, while I sat in front of the television watching nothing. By the time Serena brought Tyler home from school and started making dinner, I had made a decision. I was going to find out what that email said. I'm not proud of what I did next, and I won't dress it up. I went through my son's old things. When Derek died, Serena had packed up most of his belongings in boxes that were stacked in the spare room off the garage. She'd asked me to hold on to them until she had a more permanent place to live. I'd never opened those boxes. It felt like a violation of something. Even though Derek was my son, those were his things, and grief makes you careful about the possessions of the dead. But in one of those boxes, I found Derek's personal laptop. I knew his password. I'd set it up for him 6 years ago when he'd asked for my help. He was never particularly good with technology, and he'd never changed it from the one I'd created. I tried it, and the laptop opened. I wasn't sure what I was looking for. I started with his emails. What I found there took me 3 hours to read through, and by the end of those 3 hours, I was sitting on the concrete floor of that spare room in the dark because I hadn't noticed the sun go down, and everything I thought I knew about the last 2 years of my life had been rearranged into something I barely recognized. My son had known something was wrong with Margaret's death. He'd written it out in a series of emails to himself, a habit he had, Serena had once mentioned, of organizing his thoughts by writing them like letters. He'd been doing research. He'd found a doctor, someone he hadn't told me about, someone he'd consulted privately about Margaret's medication and her condition and the specific circumstances of what the autopsy had called a routine cardiac event. The doctor had raised questions, not accusations, questions, about the levels of a particular compound found in Margaret's system, about whether those levels were consistent with her prescribed dosage, about a plant-based substance that can, in certain concentrations, mimic the effects of a natural cardiac event almost perfectly. Derek had written, "I don't want to believe this. I need to be wrong, but I cannot stop thinking about the foxglove." Foxglove. I had to look it up on my phone right there on that concrete floor. It's a flowering plant. Beautiful. Actually tall purple blooms. The kind you'd see in a garden. It also contains compounds called cardiac glycosides. In the wrong dose, it can cause a heart to stop. And it is, according to what I read, extremely difficult to distinguish from a natural cardiac event unless a pathologist knows specifically to look for it. Margaret had a garden. More precisely, Margaret had her rose bushes, and along the back fence, a border of perennials that she'd planted years ago and never fully catalogued. Things she'd dug up from her mother's yard, things neighbors had given her as cuttings. She could tell you every plant by name. I could not tell you a single one. I sat there on that floor and I thought about who had access to Margaret's garden, who had been in this house during the months she was sick, who had been around her medications, her morning tea, the routine of her days. Serena had brought her herbal tea. I remembered it specifically. She'd read something about a blend that was supposed to support heart health, and she'd brought over a tin of it and told Margaret it might help alongside her medication. Margaret had been touched. She'd drunk it every morning for 2 months before she died. I didn't want to believe it either. Derek had been asking the same questions, and Derek was dead. I started going back through the emails more carefully. I found a thread between Derek and a private investigator, a woman named Carol Briggs, based out of Columbus. He'd hired her about 3 months before his accident. She'd been looking into Serena's background. What Carol had found was this. Serena had been married once before, briefly, in her late 20s, to a man in Arizona. That man had also died unexpectedly. Heart failure. He'd been 34 years old. His estate, modest as it was, had passed entirely to Serena. She'd moved to Ohio 6 months later. And there was one more thing. Margaret had a life insurance policy. I'd known about it. We'd taken it out together years ago, the way married couples do, naming each other as beneficiaries. When Margaret died, I was the beneficiary. The money had come to me, and I'd put it in a savings account I hadn't touched, because touching it felt like spending something I shouldn't spend. What I hadn't known was that Derek had also had a policy, a large one, taken out through his employer and supplemented with a private policy. Serena had encouraged him to buy about a year before Margaret died. The beneficiary on Derek's policy was Serena. Derek had been worth considerably more dead than alive. I found Carol Briggs's contact information in Derek's email. I called her the next morning, early, before Serena and Tyler were awake. Carol remembered the case. She told me Derek had called her 3 days before his accident, sounding frightened, saying he thought Serena knew he was investigating her. He'd told Carol he was going to take Tyler and come stay with me for a while, just until he could figure out what to do. He never made it. Carol said she'd wanted to go to the police after the accident, but that she had no physical evidence. Everything was conjecture, patterns, questions, without definitive answers. She'd kept the file. She told me if I was willing to pursue it, She would help me. I was willing. Here is what I want to tell you about the weeks that followed, because I think it matters. I did not confront Serena. I know that's what you might expect. The grief-stricken father, the angry man who's lost everything, storming in with accusations. I thought about it. There were nights I sat at this kitchen table after everyone was asleep, and I thought about looking her in the eye and asking her directly. But I didn't, because Derek had been frightened, and Derek had ended up dead on Route 9, and I had a 7-year-old grandson in my house who had already lost both his parents, and did not need to lose his grandfather too. I was careful. I was methodical. I was, for the first time in my life, willing to be patient in a way that did not come naturally to me. Carol connected me with a detective she trusted, a retired homicide investigator named Patterson who now did private consulting. Patterson reviewed everything Derek had compiled and agreed it was worth taking to law enforcement, but carefully, with the right people, not the local department where everything might get back to the wrong ears before it was ready. We went to the state level. The investigation took 11 weeks. I know because I counted every one of them. 11 weeks of living in this house with Serena, eating dinner across from her, saying good morning, watching her help Tyler with his homework. 11 weeks of not knowing if she suspected anything. 11 weeks of being afraid, genuinely afraid, in a way I hadn't been since those days in the hospital waiting for news about Margaret that never came in time. The state investigators were able to obtain records. I couldn't access phone records, financial records, the details of the insurance claims, the autopsy reports from both Margaret and the man Serena had been married to in Arizona. They also, after getting a warrant, found something in Serena's storage unit across town, a unit I hadn't known existed. Dried plant material, glass bottles, a set of notes in Serena's handwriting describing preparation methods and dosages. She had been doing it deliberately, both times. Margaret had not died of a natural cardiac event. The investigators were able to determine, through a re-examination of the preserved tissue samples from her autopsy, that the compound levels were inconsistent with her prescribed medication and consistent with ingestion of a prepared foxglove extract. Someone had been putting it in her tea, small amounts over weeks, and then a final dose that her weakened heart could not withstand. Derek's accident was still being classified as an accident pending further investigation, but the phone records showed that Serena had called a prepaid phone, never identified twice on the afternoon of the day he died. The investigators believed she had not acted alone on that one. That part of the case is still open. The morning they came to arrest her, I was sitting on the back porch with my coffee. Tyler was still asleep upstairs. Serena came outside to ask if I wanted more coffee. She did that some mornings, that small domestic gesture that I had taken for months as a sign that she was trying, that we were all trying together, that grief had made us into something like a family. I said no thank you. She looked at me for a moment in a way I couldn't read, and then the officers came around the side of the house. She didn't say anything. That's the part I think about. She didn't cry, didn't ask what was happening, didn't protest. She looked at me, and I think she'd known for a while. I think she'd felt the shape of it closing in. She went with them quietly, and the only thing she said, as they walked her through the gate, was to ask if Tyler would be taken care of. I told her yes. That part at least I could promise. Tyler was with me on the porch by then, drawn outside by the sound of voices. He's 7 years old. He's old enough to know something serious was happening, and young enough that I could hold him against my side and tell him it was going to be okay without him knowing exactly what okay was going to have to mean. He asked me if his mom was coming back. I held him tighter, and I said that we were going to figure everything out together, him and me. That's the truest thing I had to offer him. Serena was charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of conspiracy. The Arizona case was reopened. The state where Derek died opened a parallel investigation. I don't know yet how all of it will end in the courtroom. My attorney tells me to be prepared for it to take years. But here is what I know. I know that Margaret loved her garden and her watercolor class and her coffee every morning and her trip to Savannah that she never got to take. I know that Derek loved his mother more than he could find words for, and that when he began to suspect the truth, he was brave enough to chase it down even when it frightened him, and that courage cost him everything. I know that Tyler asks for his grandfather every morning now, and I am here every morning to answer. And I know this, the people inside your home, inside your grief, inside the most private corners of your loss, you trust them because trust is how you survive the unsurvivable. It is not weakness to have trusted. It is not foolishness. It is the thing that makes us human, and it is worth protecting, even now, even after everything. I still water Margaret's roses. I still don't know the names of everything growing along the back fence. and I've been very careful not to let Tyler play near it until the investigators came and took samples of everything and cleared what was left. But the roses are fine. She chose them well. They came back this spring without any help from me, stubborn and red and absolutely sure of themselves, the way she always was. I like to think she knew what she was doing when she planted them.